Hi, welcome to the lecture on systems and systems of systems. So far in the class, what we've been talking about is our reliance on systems. But in fact, what I'd like to point out is it's actually our reliance on systems of systems. And so far in the class, we've been talking about trustworthy systems. And I'd like to point out that what we really mean is trustworthy systems of systems. And so by the end of this lecture, I hope that you can define what a system is in the abstract and what we mean when we say systems of systems. I hope that you can characterize and appreciate the role of boundaries and trust zones. And we want to apply that to both securing systems as well as to securing systems of systems. Despite having boundaries and trust zones, we need to understand that there are still limits to certainty and limits to security. And so we're going to talk about why that is and what they are. And I think by the end of the lecture, you should be able to appreciate that cybersecurity has to adapt to how these systems work in the real world. So here what we have at the top is a pretty basic definition in the abstract of what a system is. A system is a collection of components that work together to perform a function or achieve a purpose that the individual parts cannot. And so system, and in the top left graphic, there are three system elements, right? We can think about concrete things. We could think about, a smartphone that has sensors and applications and an operating system. And we could go on, we could think about, an industrial control system. We could think about online banking, and we could identify this is what the system is and this is what its elements are. But if we drop our eyes down and we look at the NIST definition, the first sentence, an integrated set of elements, subsystems, or assemblies that accomplish a defined objective. Like, to me, that first sentence is pretty similar to the definition right under the header. What makes it a little different, what makes it a little broader, is the second sentence that says, these elements include hardware, software, firmware, people, information support elements. And so all of a sudden I start to think to myself, oh, we're talking about something much broader, much more inclusive, and much harder to pin down, right? But it's an important, I think, mindset to have. And I think this graphic over here at the left, attempts to get us thinking in a broader term contrasted to this one, where we think, I see a system has elements, but a system can also have other systems in it. And that system can have elements as well as other systems in it. And that system can have elements as well as other systems within it. So if this ultimately is the system that we're talking about securing, the system of systems, then we're thinking about securing these elements in this system along with how this system and these elements interact and exist within this system, right? So you start to understand the zooming in and looking at one individual thing, as well as the zooming back out and trying to think about it in context. And so to me, this is much more of a systems of systems graphic. And so what we also want to think about is the set or arrangement that results when independent and useful systems are integrated. So this table here is meant to pull out a couple of key ideas, and let's just walk through sort of row by row. So a system itself is composed of components, subsystems, or assemblies. So is a system of systems. But in a system of systems, those components, subsystems, or assemblies have some degree of independence. A system is designed and developed to accomplish a single unified mission or function. But a system of systems, the beautiful thing about computing and data is that it's malleable and reusable. But the vexing thing, and that is what affords the opportunity to achieve capabilities beyond what an individual computing system can accomplish. But those same things, that malleability, that flexibility, that reusability, is what sometimes in cybersecurity becomes so vexing. So when systems are developed, the elements are integrated by design under centralized management, right? But when you start composing these systems together that are independent, they frequently have distributed management, decentralized management. The problems are what we call polycentric problems. Problems don't originate from one source within a hierarchy. They originate from many different places. And you frequently don't have any kind of centralized management structure over these polycentric problems. And so what happens, right, is that constituent systems, not only are they distributed and decentralized and operate independently, they're integrated in a distributed, decentralized, independent fashion. And this is a foreshadowing. In the next lesson, you're going to learn a little bit about the system development life cycle, and you're going to learn how important it is to think about security across the life cycle, to include when systems are integrated and implemented into larger systems. And that's so important when thinking about cybersecurity as a systems of systems challenge. So in any kind of system, you know, the components, when they start to interact, can give way to emergent behaviors. The key takeaway is that that is just amplified is in unquantifiable ways when we're talking about systems of systems. And it leads to a lot of complexity, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute when we talk about limits to certainty. And so ultimately, when we try to provide security for systems of systems, we get into also governance issues. Within a single system, it's usually more unified governance and more unified policy structures. But in systems of systems, there are multiple authorities, multiple stakeholders, issuing multiple policies. This leads to sometimes policy gaps, policy collisions, conflicts, policy incompatibilities, inconsistencies. And so it just makes cybersecurity even more challenging. And really, this is a shout out here on governance to Module 5, where we start to talk more about the governance and policy and law and code of conduct and ethical implications of cybersecurity. So what you call a system or what you call a system of systems. Like there's no textbook definition that is always right. It depends upon your scope of analysis, right? The heart is a system. It's made up of other subsystems. You could call it a system of systems, but when you think about the heart in the context of the human body, the heart is the system, and it's interacting with other systems in the human body, which is a system of systems. And so a cloud service is a system. A cloud service in some contexts you might want to think of as a system of systems, but when you think about the cloud service in the context of national critical infrastructure, then you're thinking about how the cloud service interacts with identity management, telecom, ICS, and you're trying to think of it in that context of this system in a system of systems. Right? So hopefully you don't feel like this is a contradiction. Hopefully you are saying to yourself, yes, I get it. I have to think about something as a system of systems, and I have to think of this same thing as a system within a system of systems. That's the cornerstone of systems thinking. If you can master that and take that through this course and through your thinking about cybersecurity, then I think you've got the security mindset. And that's going to help you understand better how failures propagate, better understand and appreciate what we mean when we talk about attack surfaces, and really understand emergent behaviors, to include vulnerabilities that come about through interactions. I'm not telling you you have to always think of everything as a system of systems. It's really only useful to model it that way when the independence of the parts and the complexity of their interactions have important behavioral implications. And those behavioral implications have a lot of security implications. So let's just talk for a minute about boundaries and trust zones, because these are also concepts that we want you to carry with you throughout the course. A boundary is meant to define, help you think about what's inside and what's under your direct control. And the idea of trust zones says, well, everything that's inside doesn't mean that it's all the same, right? And so I might need to be able to set up zones. And so I could use a really quick example. When I used to work a little bit with the National Security Agency, right? I had a security clearance, and that was able to get me on the premise, over the boundary of the premise, right? But once I got inside, I didn't have access to everything. I only had access to the things that I needed to do my job, because trust zones had been set up inside the organization. Right? So you always want to be able to think about boundaries and trust zones. That helps you think about where you need to place controls. And this applies to systems of systems as well, right? We could take this graphic right up here and we could drop it into this bubble. And it could be a system, it could be system A with its own trust zones inside. But that system has to interact with other independent systems. And so they have to negotiate their trust boundaries on an ongoing basis. And so it is, in fact, this way of thinking, this secure system architecture, that we want to practice, that helps us think about systems, helps us think about systems of systems, so that we think about containment, control, assurance, accountability, enforcement, and governance in an ongoing, paradigm view. It is this talk here is generalizable, it's abstract on purpose, because it's meant to give you key concepts that apply over and over and over again in cybersecurity. So we have an exercise that we thought would be useful here on boundary mapping and trust zones. And you've got two choices. You can either stop and do it now and then come back to the lecture, or I think there's about 10 or 11 minutes left in the lecture. You could finish the lecture and then go do the boundary mapping exercise. So I mentioned that there are limits of certainty, right? We can have boundaries, we can have trust zones, we can put in controls, we can put in controls across the life cycle. Those controls can be protective, they can be detective, responsive, but it is true that absolute assurance in cybersecurity is unattainable. There are limits to how sure we can be about our security posture. So complexity and emergence, we talked about those when we talked about distributed management, decentralized management, independent systems. So anytime you have a system that's secure in itself and it starts to interact with another system, it can interact in unexpected ways and lead to vulnerabilities that you couldn't previously have imagined. They just weren't visible when the system acted in isolation. And these kind of emergent behaviors, frequently you can only see after integration, which is why, again, a shout out to thinking about security across the system development life cycle. And we'll talk more about that in the next lesson. And you're going to see, we're going to look at an example here of the Ukraine power grid attack. And you'll see that attackers can purposefully and do purposefully exploit gaps between systems. Even when the individual system itself is performing its function and it's properly secured, it can be the gaps in between that is the interstices through which the attacker gets in. Systems operate in highly dynamic environments. There are new users all the time, software updates all the time, new integrations all the time, new threats, new exploits, adversaries. An adversary tomorrow is not the same adversary they are today, because they've learned from what they did today. So their capabilities change, their motives can change. And so what you need to always remember is that a boundary, a trust zone, can become obsolete just like that. As the system evolves, the system grows. Remember, the system is systems of systems, software, hardware, firmware, people. As it evolves and it grows, the boundary controls need to consistently be revisited, proactively present in the cybersecurity analyst's mind. Incomplete knowledge is always going to be with us. Designers rarely have full visibility into how systems will be used or misused or attacks. And so you design something based on a certain set of assumptions, and the set of assumptions might not hold, might not always hold. And so this constant pursuit, this constant questioning of What's the environment? What were the assumptions? What complexity has been added? What might be emergent, right? These are the real powerful tools in the cybersecurity toolbox, because there are limits to our certainty, and unpredictable things can and will happen. But the more that we're able to lean into that, the better I think we are prepared in proactively. Oh, I'm sorry, I went one too far. Securing our systems of systems. So the Ukraine power grid systems of systems attack, right? We say here it wasn't just a power system. The Ukraine power grid is a networked, multi-stakeholder, distributed, decentralized, cyber physical system of systems. And there's 6 steps that are listed here. And I'm not going to talk through them. I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes, and I'm going to let you read them and think about them. And as you think about them, I want you to think about people, software, hardware, software, firmware. Who's in charge? How is this system operationally independent from the next system? How did that create gaps that allowed this attack to become a reality? So read through these 6 steps and think carefully about that. All right, hopefully that gave you enough time. All right, so you can see people in here. You can see an IT system. You can see an OT system. You can see a call center. And you can see the emergency power control center. And so hopefully you're coming to appreciate that there was no single point of failure, right? That the systems were performing intended functions, but it was in fact this combination, IT, OT, telecom, physical power systems, that created emergent pathways that any one defender might not have been able to see, right? And so attackers use this complexity, right? Not by breaking one thing, but by navigating the spaces in between. So I think I just have a couple more slides left here. And this is also from a graphic from NIST SP 800-160, which is about secure state transitions. And so it's this notion that we can have dynamic security for dynamic systems of systems. That a system can start in a secure state and fail. It can start in a secure state and move to a secure runtime state and then fail. It could start in a secure runtime state and have a problem and move to a secure halt state, right? If it fails, it can move from failure to a secure recovery state. And so we don't come back to this really very deeply in this course at all. You would in future courses, about secure systems engineering, right? But we don't hear in this course, because this is a foundations course, but what we're wanting you to take away is that when a system has secure halt, secure fail, secure recovery, it's what we consider to be a fail-safe system. And that's a good thing, because systems are dynamic and they do operate in complex and emergent environments. When they do start to fail, we want them to halt or fail more safely so that they can recover more quickly. It's this important idea of trustworthy systems are resilient systems, not systems that don't fail, but when they do fail, they fail in a secure way. So in conclusion, systems thinking asks us to think about systems as independent and integrated into this larger system of systems that are inevitably going to operate in complex ways, be complex systems of systems, leading to emergent properties in dynamic environments where we can't fully know them, and they are unpredictable. And so we adopt this understanding and appreciation so that we can practice a security mindset, not once and for all, but on an ongoing basis. And we try to use boundaries and trust zones and secure state transitions in our thinking all the time. We use principles, methods, and tools. And you're going to learn those principles, methods, and tools throughout this course to think about boundaries, trust zones, and to remember this concept of secure state transitions. And when we do this as a practice, we have a better chance of more trustworthy systems. So that ends this lecture. I hope you're able to hold on to these important ideas as you work through the course.